It is crunch time here on our homestead. So in a couple days, we're supposed to get a bunch of rain followed by really cold temperatures. And we still have a bunch of stuff that we need to get out of the ground, get harvested and get stored away to feed us all winter long. And we're gonna be doing this alongside of parenting our 4 young kids, living life and everything that goes along with that. So I'm gonna get going. I gotta harvest grapes here now and we're gonna see if we can get this all done.
Mom, can I pick one?
How about I hand them to you and you throw them in the box? Before moving on to our homestead about 3 years ago, we had been gardening for a handful of years, but we always had the approach of just growing a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And what we realized was that when we did that, everything would basically ripen and be ready right around the same time, and August, September months, we'd harvest everything, but there would be so much that would ripen at the same time. We wouldn't even be able to eat it all, so we'd be giving things away, trying to not let it go bad, and we wouldn't be able to stay on top of it, and then we wouldn't have any of that fresh, good food to feed us through the winter. So when we moved onto our homestead, we wanted to take a different approach. Instead, we made our goal to be, how could we feed our family as much as possible through the entire winter? And by doing that, it really changed everything about our gardening, what we grew, and how we grew it.
There's a whole bunch of them. Come on.
A big part of that is that now, when we're growing food, we like to leave it in the ground for as long as possible. We realize that when we harvest a lot of the things like potatoes and our storage crops in August, September, when they're ready and when they start to ripen, they're not gonna store that well to feed us through the winter. But if we can leave them in the ground for as long as possible, through October, even early November, they're gonna store so much better to feed our family all winter long. You want to go collect the ones that Abe and Eloise have over there?
Yeah.
It always feels like a bit of a balancing act to figure out when that right time to harvest is. And this year has just seemed especially strange in that because we have had such a warm fall that even though it's late October, it just doesn't feel like it. Like we've had 60, 70 degree days almost all the time, and it just really hasn't gotten cold yet, and so we've left everything in the ground, but now all of a sudden it is gonna be rainy and then it is gonna turn frigid cold here in the next week, and so it feels like we are totally kind of at this point where the switch has flipped and now we need to get everything harvested. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm feeling pretty overwhelmed heading into this week about the amount that our family has to tackle to get out of the ground and to be able to preserve all of this food. Harvesting grapes has been one of those things that's been on our list for a while. So our property has a ton of wild grapevines that kind of surround the fence line, which is awesome. And when we moved here, we really knew nothing about grapes, and so we would always harvest them in August or early September when they would start to turn from green to dark, purple or blue and ripen. And so we'd harvest them then, but we realized that they were super, super tart. And one thing we discovered was that if we would wait until after the first frost, they sweetened up and they really tasted so much better. So now we always try to wait till after that first frost to harvest our grapes. And so that's what we're doing here today, is we're getting all of those grapes harvested. We are gonna turn them into grape juice. So the grapes that we have, I'm not 100% sure what kind they are. Some people say they look like Concord. I'm not sure about that. But they're really small, they have big seeds, they're not good for fresh eating, but they're delicious for making juice out of, so maybe they are Concord. So we're gonna turn these into grape juice, which is really easy to do. You don't need to worry about removing all of the stems. We just get as many of the stems out as we can when we're harvesting, but we just throw it all in a big box, and then I'm gonna put all of those grapes into a stock pot with a little bit of water, cook them down, press them with a wooden spoon and get all of that juice out. And then we'll just go ahead and can that grape juice to have for the winter. You could then use the grape juice to make jams or jellies, or we like to turn it into like gelatin gummies. That's one of our kids' favorite snacks. And so that's probably what we'll be using the grape juice for. So while canning and preserving food by dehydrating it or freezing it is great, and we definitely do plenty of that with our greens and applesauce and tomato sauce and our fruit and things like that, we rely really, really heavily on growing storage crops. Storage crops are the best because unlike other things that require that processing, canning or whatever to get them in their storage form, storage crops, just like they sound, can just store easily as they are. And so that is really the bulk of the food that we grow is these storage crops. So some of our favorites are potatoes, like we're harvesting here. We do a lot of winter squash, beans, dent corn, carrots, beets, garlic are some of the other storage crops that we grow that really require no processing in order to be ready to store for the winter. The first year that we moved on to our homestead, Jim and I were actually in a book club where we read the book The Resilient Gardener by Carol Deppe, and that had a really big impact on just our perspective of this kind of idea of growing food to feed our family year round, and a specific emphasis on growing these storage crops that really easily can feed our family all year, and then you can also save the seed easily to be replanted with just not a ton of work. And so that is really kind of the route that we went, and we've loved it. It's been such a great fit and has allowed us to grow so much food for our family, and I think just get way more bang for our buck out of the things that we're growing. Harvesting potatoes is not a fast activity, as you can kind of see by us here. It takes a long time, and so this is one of those things that we definitely always try to budget a time when both Jim and I can do it together. So Jim is doing basically the digging while I can be kind of pulling and cleaning potatoes out. It's way faster and more enjoyable to do it together, but it does just take us a long time. So we planted a 150-foot row of potatoes here, and this took us 4 different afternoons of 2 to 3 hours each afternoon, 4 straight days to harvest all of those potatoes. But in the end, we ended up with around 400 pounds of potatoes that we harvested from that one row. So we like to grow several different varieties of potatoes on our homestead, and the reason for that is they all kind of have their own characteristics that we value. So we grow a couple different varieties of purple potatoes. We love the Magic Molly and the Adirondack Blue, and the reason we grow a lot of purple potatoes is because they add extra nutrients and health properties that you're not gonna get in the white or yellow potatoes. So they're gonna have kind of more of those antioxidants. Anything that you grow that has those deep, rich, purple, blue colors are just gonna add a host of nutrients that you're not gonna often find in the more white and yellow colors. And so I love the book Eating on the Wild Side by Jo Robinson, where she really gets into all of this and how to really maximize growing the most nutrient-dense food and even picking it from the grocery store and really getting your best bang for your buck in terms of nutrients in the food that you grow. The other 2 varieties of potatoes that we love are the Corolla, and that's just gonna be a yellow, super delicious, super creamy. That's the potato that we get the most compliments on from people who come eat dinner or eat it. Everyone loves the Corolla. It's just a melt in your mouth, delicious experience. And then the other potato is the Elba. And we actually grow about half of our potatoes are Elbas, and that is because, not because it's our favorite tasting potato, although it's good, it's delicious, mainly because the Elba potatoes store really, really well. And so when the other potatoes start to get soft, maybe in February or March, the Elba potato remains more firm until later. And so that's why we like to grow those and even more of those, because that's gonna feed us well into even April or May in the spring. So we'll use the Adirondack Blues, the Magic Mollies, and the Corollas first, and then we'll switch to eating the rest of our Elbas, and that will be able to feed us hopefully even into the summer. So one challenge that we face right now is figuring out how to get all of this food harvested. So we have 4 kids, the youngest being 6, 7 months old, up to 7. And so as you can imagine, life apart from harvesting all of this food and having a homestead is already super full, just trying to stay on top of everything that they require. So figuring out times to get out, to get all this food harvested is definitely a challenge that we are facing right now. What's been working well for us is that we typically have our normal morning routine with, we do, chores and breakfast, our homeschool routine and lunch, and then in the afternoon we can usually count on our younger 2 taking a good 2 to 3 hour nap. And so this tends to be our main time to get out and harvest. And so as soon as we get them down for their naps, our older 2 will do about an hour of quiet time, giving Jim and I at least a solid hour to get out there and get some harvesting done. And then usually after the older 2 are done kind of doing a quiet time on their own, they'll come out and join us for a little bit, which is also super helpful before the younger 2 get up from their naps. It can definitely feel like a challenge when we are in this kind of crunch time of needing to get all this stuff out of the ground before the weather turns and it's gonna get super cold, while balancing really wanting to include our kids in the harvesting process. And so we just always try to be really intentional about just creating a balance there of having a time when Jim and I are able to get out and get as much done as we can, but then also including them because it's so good for them and it's really so fun for us to do it all as a family together, even if it might not be the fastest way to go about doing it. But this year we loved harvesting potatoes alongside them. Jim would dig up the potatoes with his pitchfork and our older daughter would dig them out as fast as she could and try to race to see how many she could get as fast as possible. Our son was there pulling out all the big fat worms and collecting them in a bucket to give to our chickens. And I was cleaning all of the dirt off the potatoes to store them, and my hands were just caked in dirt. But really just that whole experience of doing it all together, like those are the memories that we are gonna remember from the potato harvest, way more than how many potatoes we got or what they were like or anything like that. The last area that we are harvesting this week is kind of that main kitchen garden area that we have. And so we've already harvested quite a bit from here. This garden is looking kind of sad, super weedy, not great, but there is still quite a bit of food in there that needs to be harvested. So we've already harvested all of our beets and our carrots from here. I would love to leave those for as long as possible, like our potatoes, but our beets and our carrots tend to just get eaten by bugs if we leave them in the ground. So I already harvested those back in early September, I would say, but we still have plenty out here that we need to harvest. So cabbage is another great storage crop. We like to leave this until harvesting now, and these brassicas do really well in the cool weather. So we can leave cabbage, kale, Brussels sprouts for really late in our garden. And so we're harvesting those now. We're gonna use most of the cabbage that we grow for making sauerkraut, to have sauerkraut for the full year ahead. But because I'm not gonna be processing that immediately, it will store well in the fridge for at least the next month or 2 until I get around to making all of that sauerkraut. Brussels sprouts are another one that we love, and so These are great. You just cut the whole tree down at the base, and really they store best if you just keep the whole tree together as opposed to pulling off those individual sprouts from the Brussels sprouts. So we just remove the leaves, and then you can just store that whole tree together, and they'll store that way for a good month or two on the tree. So that's what we'll do here. And then if we have a ton extra, the best way to store those Brussels sprouts long term is to pull off your sprouts, to blanch them, and then you can freeze them. That's really the only way that I know of to store Brussels sprouts long term. Cleaning out the garden is always a really fun time for the cows too, because they get all of the treats of the extra leaves and everything. I love that nothing goes to waste, everything gets eaten. So all those cabbage leaves, Brussels sprouts leaves, anything else that we are cleaning out of the garden, the weeds, they all go to the cows. The other two big things that we are harvesting this week are our leeks and our onions. And so as opposed to carrots and beets that tend to get decimated by the bugs pretty easily, nothing ever bothers the leeks and onions, so bugs stay away from them. In fact, I think they do a great job of deterring bugs from coming to the garden, and so we love growing leeks and onions. Plus, they're just an awesome thing that we love to use in our cooking and use an abundance of them all of the time. So we like to grow as many as we can. Harvesting leeks is another one of those things that we like to do with two people if at all possible. So Jim will do the digging, he'll dig up those leeks while I'll kind of prepare it for storage. And so to do that, you want to cut off a good chunk of the green leafy part at the top. So I usually cut it so the leek itself is around 6 to 7 inches long. So you're going to cut off a lot of that just longer green leaf. And then you're also going to want to cut the roots at the bottom, the like hairy white roots. And so just try to knock off all the dirt off those roots as you can, and then cut them at the base of that root part. We always store leeks for longer term storage. We just put them in a plastic bag and then keep them in like the crisper drawer of our fridge, and they'll store that way well for a good couple of months. I think because it's been so warm this fall, the greens on our onions still haven't totally died back yet. So I would say about half of them are ready to harvest, but the other half are still going strong with those greens. And so if you're growing onions for storage, you really want to wait until the greens have died back. Then they're gonna store so much better. You're gonna cure your onions and they're gonna store for many, many months once those greens have died back. If you wanna just use them for fresh eating, harvesting them now with the greens on them is totally fine. But if you wanna harvest them for storage, wait until those greens have died back and then they're ready to harvest. What we like to do is use up all of our leeks first, and then after we have used our leeks over the next couple months, then we'll switch to using our onions. One other big thing on storing onions is that you do want to make sure you are storing them away from potatoes. So we'll keep our potatoes stored in our basement, we'll keep our onions stored in our mudroom or garage or a different area, because they will cause each other to ripen and you don't want to store them together. After pushing hard all week and balancing all of the things, we were super happy to get over 500 pounds of food harvested for our family. We are tired, it's been a long week, and we didn't quite get everything done that we wanted to. The onions are still out there, there are Brussels sprouts that need harvesting, there's a ton of cleanup to do, and the garlic needs to get planted. But overall, we are thrilled to have all the potatoes harvested, the corn, beans, and squash are out of the ground, and really we're set up super well to feed our family through the winter.